the night sky over southern England was heavy with anticipation, the kind that clung to every soul in the camp like a second skin. June 5, 1944, would forever mark the eve of history, though few truly grasped the enormity of what was about to unfold. Among the thousands of soldiers waiting in the mud and gloom of Normandy staging areas was Private First Class Robert Bobby Harrison, a young man of 21, writing a letter by candlelight. He dipped his pen into the ink, letting the thick liquid smear slightly as his hand trembled. Not from fear, but from the weight of what he had witnessed and what he might soon face. The letter would never be sent unless fate allowed, yet he wrote it as though the act itself could anchor him against the storm. "Dear Emily," he began, the words flowing like whispered prayers, "if you are reading this, know that I have held your face in my mind through every drill, every march, every endless hour of waiting in this damp camp." Outside his small tent, the camp was alive with the quiet hum of preparation. Jeeps creaked as they carried weapons and ammunition across the muddy grounds. Men moved in measured steps, checking their rifles, tightening straps, and speaking in low tones that barely carried in the humid night air. The officers walked briskly between tents, issuing last-minute orders, their faces shadowed by the brim of their caps. Bobby paused, inhaling the damp scent of the English countryside mixed with gun oil and sweat. Somewhere in the distance, the muffled sound of artillery practice reminded him that the war had not paused for anyone. His eyes drifted to the letter, and he found solace in the words, in the act of writing, as if each letter pressed onto the paper could hold back the tide of history itself. He wrote of home, of Emily's smile, of the garden she tended, of the small routines that had once seemed trivial but now felt monumental. "I keep your laughter in my ears," he scribbled, "so when the world around me explodes in chaos, I can remember that there is still light, still a reason to endure." Meanwhile, across the staging area, the senior officers gathered in tense clusters. Generals, colonels, and lieutenants pored over maps spread across large tables, illuminated by lanterns. Every line drawn, every coordinate marked, carried the weight of thousands of lives. The plan was deceptively simple on paper: storm the beaches of Normandy, secure the exits, and push inland, but the human cost it promised was anything but simple. The men in the camps knew the stakes. They had trained for months in the rolling fields of England, enduring grueling exercises with heavy packs, simulated landings, and constant reminders of what awaited them across the English Channel. They had read the reports, memorized the maps, and yet, in the quiet of the night, reality had a way of slipping through their practiced bravado. Bobby closed his eyes for a moment, imagining the cold water of the channel, the steel of the landing craft beneath him, the first whistling bullets slicing the air above the sand. He imagined the chaos, the screams, the thunderous pounding of shells, and yet beneath it all, he pictured Emily's hand in his, steady and sure. "If this letter finds you," he continued, "remember that I fought not just for survival, but for the life we dreamed of together. That even in the darkest hour, I carried your light inside me." The candle flickered as a gust of wind swept through the open tent flap. Outside, the men checked their gear one last time. Boots polished, rifles cleaned, grenades accounted for, and helmets strapped tight. They moved silently, a quiet procession of determination. There was no bravado here, no shouting or exaggerated heroics, only the gravity of what lay ahead. Nearby, Captain Miller walked among the troops, his eyes scanning each face. He stopped briefly at Bobby's tent, noticing the young soldier hunched over his paper. "Writing a letter?" he asked softly, not wanting to disturb the sacred ritual. Bobby looked up and nodded, words catching in his throat. "Yes, sir, for my fiancée." Miller gave a small nod of understanding. "Keep it short. Keep it honest. And when you get to that beach tomorrow, keep your head down, keep moving, and trust the men beside you." Bobby swallowed hard, returning to his letter. Each word now seemed heavier, loaded with significance. He wrote of the camaraderie among the soldiers, of the quiet moments when they shared cigarettes and whispered stories of home. "These men," he wrote, "are my brothers. If anything happens to me, they will carry on. Take care of them in your thoughts." Hours passed, the night stretching endlessly. The distant rumble of artillery practice and the occasional bark of a drill sergeant's order punctuated the darkness. Bobby finally signed the letter, folding it neatly, pressing it into the envelope with careful precision. He tucked it inside his jacket, close to his heart, as if the paper itself could shield him from what was coming. Beyond the camp, the English coast was a quiet, deceptive calm. The channel waters glimmered under the moonlight, betraying no hint of the violence that would soon erupt. Across those waters, German fortifications awaited, hidden beneath camouflage netting and concrete bunkers. Machine gun nests, barbed wire, and minefields would greet the men in the coming hours, each designed to halt their advance and claim their lives. Back in the camp, Bobby rose from the tent, stretching his stiff muscles. He joined his squad, men who had trained with him for months, their faces pale in the dim lantern light. They exchanged quiet nods, hands gripping rifles and ammunition belts. There was no need for speeches, the silence carried everything they felt: fear, resolve, and the fragile hope that they might survive the dawn. The senior officers conducted one final briefing. Maps were pointed at, markers shifted, and the men absorbed every word with precision. Every landing craft had a designated target, every beach sector a mission, every unit a responsibility. The strategy was intricate, detailed, and unforgiving. Any deviation could cost lives, and yet the human factor, the unpredictable courage, fear, and resolve of each soldier, would determine the outcome. As the hours crept toward midnight, Bobby returned to his small tent one last time. He lit the candle again, staring at the letter he had written. "If I do not come back," he whispered, "know that I loved you more than words can say. And if I do, we will see this through together." He folded the letter one final time, placing it safely in his jacket pocket. Then, he lay down on the thin canvas cot, listening to the soft breathing of his fellow soldiers, the distant hum of preparations, and the gentle lapping of the channel. Sleep, if it came at all, was light and fleeting. Every creak of the camp, every shift of gear, every whisper of wind through the trees reminded him that tomorrow would change everything. In the quiet darkness, men dreamed. Some dreamed of home, some of survival, some of glory, and some simply of waking again. The night stretched endlessly, carrying with it a weight that could not be measured, only endured. As the candle burned low, Bobby Harrison stared at the flickering flame, thinking of Emily, of his comrades, and of the dawn that would come all too soon. Somewhere in the dark waters of the channel, destiny waited, ready to test courage, resilience, and the indomitable human spirit. And so, the eve of D-Day settled over the English camp, heavy with anticipation, fear, and hope, a night that would be remembered for generations. The letter tucked close to Bobby's heart was more than ink on paper. It was a testament, a promise, and a farewell to innocence, as the world prepared to witness one of the most monumental days in history. Fade out with distant rumble of ships preparing for the crossing, waves crashing against the hulls, and the quiet resolve of soldiers on the brink of history. Into the fire, the beaches of Normandy. Fade in with the sound of crashing waves, the creak of landing craft, and distant artillery. The first light of dawn had not yet touched the waters of Normandy, yet the channel was alive with movement. Thousands of landing craft, brimming with soldiers, churned the gray waters as waves lapped against steel hulls. The men within these vessels, faces pale and tense, gripped their rifles, ammunition belts, and courage, bracing themselves for what awaited. Private Bobby Harrison sat in his landing craft, knees pressed against his chest, staring at the far shore. In the dim pre-dawn gloom, he could barely make out the jagged coastline, dotted with obstructions and fortified bunkers. Each silhouette was a promise of danger, each shadow a potential end. Beside him, Corporal James Riley adjusted his helmet, muttering a quiet prayer under his breath. "God, let us make it through." Bobby did not respond. Words felt inadequate, useless against the roaring cacophony of the sea, the engines, and the artillery. His fingers brushed the folded letter in his jacket pocket. "Emily. I hope this reaches you," he thought. "If not, then at least I wrote it." The landing craft surged forward, waves splashing over the gunnels, and men gripped their positions as the ramp dropped with a metallic clang. Water surged into the boat, cold and biting, as the first men leapt onto the sand. The storm of gunfire erupted instantly, crackling rifles, screaming bullets, and the deep thunder of enemy artillery. "Move! Move!" shouted a lieutenant, voice barely audible above the chaos. Bobby fell forward, rolling into the shallow water, rifle raised. Sand and shrapnel exploded around him. The world narrowed to survival, 1 foot in front of the other, 1 breath, 1 shot at a time. The beach was a scene of horror. Men fell in the surf, swept away by waves or cut down by machine gun fire. Obstacles, sharpened stakes, and tangled barbed wire tore through the sand, impeding the advance. Explosions sent geysers of sand into the air, the concussion rattling bones and minds alike. Each step forward was a battle against gravity, the enemy, and the fear clawing at their hearts. Bobby reached the first piece of cover, a crater left by an earlier shell. He pressed himself into the cold sand, listening to the screams, the orders, the cries of men around him. The air smelled of salt, blood, and gunpowder, a combination that would haunt dreams for decades. "Cover me!" Riley shouted, sprinting from his own hiding place. He fired a few precise shots at a German machine gun nest, buying a few precious seconds for his squad. Bobby counted the seconds, each one stretched to eternity, before advancing to the next crater. Across the beach, officers shouted orders that were drowned by the chaos. Smoke, dust, and sand stung eyes and mouths, making communication nearly impossible. Yet amidst the panic, there was a rhythm, a strange, brutal coordination. Soldiers advanced in small groups, taking turns providing covering fire, dragging wounded comrades, and clearing obstacles as best they could. Bobby finally reached a shell hole deeper than the others. He pressed his back against the damp sand, rifle ready, scanning for targets. He caught sight of a young German soldier aiming from a concrete bunker, the barrel of his MG-42 flashing in the dim light. Bobby held his breath and squeezed the trigger. 1 shot, 2, 3. The bunker fell silent. Behind him, men cheered, a brief surge of relief that was immediately swallowed by the roar of artillery. Each life saved was a fleeting victory, each death a grim reminder of their peril. Time stretched and folded in the chaos of battle. The sun began to rise, revealing the beach in its full, terrible clarity. Bodies littered the sand. Smoke coiled from burning vehicles and ammo crates. Men advanced with grim determination, some limping, some carrying the wounded, some moving only because stopping meant certain death. Amid this maelstrom, Bobby found himself beside a young private named Thomas. Thomas's face was pale, eyes wide with terror. I can't go on," he stammered, voice shaking. "You can," Bobby said firmly. "I'm here. We move together. 1 step at a time. That's all we can do." They advanced in tandem, bullets whizzing past, until they reached a small hedgerow. The men took cover, exchanging fire with German soldiers atop the cliffs. The high ground was a death trap, and yet the beach could not be abandoned. Every inch gained was measured in blood and courage. The chaos of battle was not merely noise, it was a test of mind, body, and spirit. Bobby's hands were raw from gripping his rifle, his uniform soaked with sweat, water, and sand. He could hear the cries of the dying, the orders of officers, the relentless crack of rifles, and the deep bass of artillery. Every nerve screamed, every instinct screamed, survive. Yet amid the terror, a sense of purpose prevailed. For this was more than survival. It was history in motion. Every man on that beach knew that the world would remember what happened here, even if they did not live to see it. Bobby remembered the letter in his jacket pocket. He imagined Emily reading his words, imagining him alive, brave, and unbroken. It was a lifeline, a tether to humanity in the chaos. Hours passed like minutes. The beach slowly yielded to the Allied advance, each bunker cleared, each obstacle overcome. Yet the cost was staggering. Medics moved tirelessly, treating the wounded under fire. Bodies were retrieved when possible, others left behind, memorialized only in memory and photograph. By mid-morning, Bobby's unit had reached the first defensive line of the German fortifications. Mortar fire rained down, and machine gun nests still blazed across the sand. But the men pressed forward, step by bloody step, driven by training, duty, and sheer will. Bobby paused behind a crumbling wall of sandbags, catching his breath. Beside him, Riley checked ammunition and surveyed the advancing enemy. "We're not done yet," Riley said grimly. "This is just the start." Indeed, the beach was only the beginning. Beyond lay fields, hedgerows, and towns fortified with deadly precision. Yet as Bobby gazed across the carnage, he realized something profound. They were advancing. Inch by inch, lives lost and courage gained, but they were advancing. And every step forward brought them closer to the liberation they had fought for, and the home they hoped to return to. Bobby's thoughts returned to Emily. The letter tucked safely against his chest felt heavier now, charged with the events he had witnessed. He continued forward, rifle ready, bullets expended, every movement measured, precise, and necessary. The first day of D-Day was not a story of glory, it was a story of endurance, of sacrifice, and of unbreakable human spirit. For every victory on that beach, there was a cost measured in lives, in courage, and in the innocence that would never return. And yet, amid the smoke, blood, and chaos, there was determination. The Allies were here to stay, and every man who survived carried a piece of that victory with him. Bobby Harrison moved forward, and with each step, he wrote history in the sand with his courage, and in the hearts of those who would remember. Fade out with the sounds of artillery, waves, and distant cries, signaling the brutal dawn of D-Day and the beginning of the fight for Normandy. Through the hedgerows, the battle for Normandy. Fade in with distant artillery, the rumble of tanks, and the crackle of rifles as soldiers push inland. Beyond the beaches of Normandy lay a different kind of battlefield. Here, the open sands gave way to the patchwork of hedgerows, fields, and small villages that defined the French countryside. For the men who survived the landing, the fight had only just begun. Private Bobby Harrison crouched behind a dense hedgerow, his uniform soaked, rifle muddy, and hands trembling from the relentless exertion of the morning. The scent of wet earth, blood, and smoke clung to the air. He peered over the top of the hedge, scanning the fields for movement. Every shadow could conceal a sniper. Every tree could hide a machine gun. Every farmhouse could be a death trap. Corporal Riley joined him, adjusting his helmet and wiping sweat from his brow. "We move in pairs," he said quietly. "One covers, one advances. Watch each other's backs. No heroics." Bobby nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. The letter in his jacket pocket pressed against his chest. Each step inland felt like carrying a piece of his home, his humanity, through the firestorm of war. The terrain was treacherous. Hedgerows, tall and thick, offered cover but also trapped the soldiers in confined spaces. Progress was measured in yards, each one contested fiercely by German defenders who knew the land intimately. Snipers took deadly aim from behind walls and trees, and machine guns cut down anyone caught in the open. Mortars rained destruction on advancing troops, turning fields into craters of mud, metal, and human suffering. Bobby and Riley moved from hedgerow to hedgerow, advancing cautiously but relentlessly. Behind them, the sounds of battle never ceased: screams, gunfire, explosions, and the distant roar of tanks grinding through fields. The men had learned that the hedgerows were not merely obstacles but a deadly trap. Visibility was limited, and ambushes were constant. As they approached the first village, the soldiers encountered their first real resistance. German forces had fortified the streets, placing snipers in towers, machine guns in doorways, and mines along every conceivable approach. Lieutenant Harris, leading Bobby's unit, signaled for a halt. He scanned the streets with binoculars, mapping the enemy's positions. "We hit them hard and fast," he whispered. "Suppress their fire, clear the buildings, and move on. Keep it tight." Bobby's heart pounded as the order was given. Smoke grenades launched, filling the streets with thick clouds, masking their advance. The men sprinted from cover to cover, firing, ducking, and yelling. Each building was a battleground. Rooms were cleared methodically, grenades thrown to flush out defenders, and rifles cracked as soldiers engaged in the deadly dance of urban combat. In one house, Bobby faced a German soldier in a close encounter. The man raised his rifle, but Bobby was quicker. The crack of the shot echoed through the walls, and the soldier collapsed. Bobby paused, chest heaving, stomach twisting, as the reality sank in: every victory here demanded a price. Amid the chaos, a young private named Samuel stumbled beside Bobby, clutching a wound in his shoulder. I can't," he gasped. "You can," Bobby said, voice firm but calm. "We get you back to cover. One step at a time." Together, they retreated to a small, ruined barn that offered temporary refuge. Inside, Bobby saw the faces of other soldiers, some screaming, some praying, some silent with shock. The barn reeked of fear, sweat, and gunpowder, but it was the only place to catch their breath. From the barn, they observed German reinforcements moving into position. The defenders were not just holding ground, they were adapting, setting traps, and using the terrain to their advantage. The Allies had to respond with both strategy and courage. Bobby and Riley formed a plan with Lieutenant Harris. They would split into two teams, one to provide suppressive fire, the other to flank the enemy. The plan was dangerous, but hesitation was not an option. Every second mattered, every delay could mean death. As they advanced again, the hedgerows became a corridor of terror. Mortar rounds exploded nearby, hurling dirt, wood, and metal. Bullets zipped past, some striking close enough to graze skin, others tearing through uniforms and flesh. Soldiers shouted, some calling names, others giving orders. The ground itself seemed alive with danger. Bobby and Riley reached a farmhouse that had been converted into a German command post. The building was fortified, windows barred, and machine guns covering every approach. Lieutenant Harris gave the signal, and Bobby hurled a grenade through a broken window. The explosion ripped through the structure, and men poured in to clear the remaining defenders. Inside, the devastation was total. German soldiers lay unconscious or dead, and equipment was destroyed or seized. Bobby caught a glimpse of a map detailing enemy positions further inland. It was a brief but vital victory, giving the Allies information that could save countless lives in the coming hours. But victory was fleeting. Beyond the farmhouse, the battle raged. Each field, each hedgerow, each village was contested fiercely. The Germans were disciplined, determined, and familiar with every inch of the terrain. The Allies had numbers, but the price of progress was measured in blood, exhaustion, and courage beyond reckoning. As night fell, Bobby's unit consolidated in a small, ruined village. Fires burned from wrecked vehicles and buildings, casting flickering shadows across the cobblestones. The wounded were tended as best they could, ammunition was counted, and brief orders were given for the next day. Bobby sat against a broken wall, pulling the letter from his jacket once more. He read the words, imagining Emily's face, her smile, her hope. In that brief moment, he was reminded of what he fought for, the world beyond the war, the lives they hoped to reclaim, the future they dreamed of building. The night was restless. Shells continued to fall, snipers prowled, and every sound was a potential threat. Soldiers whispered, prayed, and braced for the dawn, knowing that tomorrow would demand more courage, more sacrifice, and more endurance. Bobby knew this was not the end. The battle for Normandy had only begun. The beaches were behind them, but the countryside ahead was an endless series of obstacles, ambushes, and deadly encounters. Yet amidst the fear and chaos, there was determination. The Allies were here to stay, and every step, every sacrifice, every act of bravery brought them closer to victory. Fade out with the sounds of distant gunfire, mortar explosions, and the restless whisper of wind through the hedgerows, signaling the long and grueling fight that lay ahead in Normandy. The final push, heroism and victory in Normandy. Fade in with dawn breaking over the French countryside, smoke rising from distant villages, and the distant rumble of artillery. The first light of morning revealed the full extent of the battlefield. Fields were scarred with craters, hedgerows reduced to rubble, and villages bore the marks of relentless bombardment. The men who had survived the initial landings now faced the challenge of pressing forward, through mud, blood, and the ever-present danger of enemy fire. Private Bobby Harrison stood atop a low ridge, surveying the terrain ahead. The village they needed to capture lay just beyond a wide meadow, exposed to sniper fire and machine gun nests. Every step forward was a risk. Every foot gained demanded courage beyond ordinary measure. Corporal Riley joined him, rifle slung over his shoulder, face streaked with dirt and sweat. "We move fast and coordinated," he said quietly. "Our orders are clear: take the village, secure the crossroads, and hold it until reinforcements arrive." Bobby nodded, pulling the letter from his jacket pocket one last time. He read Emily's words again, feeling a surge of resolve. This was why he fought, not for glory, not for medals, but for the world beyond the battlefield. The letters, the memories, the faces of loved ones waiting far away, were what gave men the courage to step into hell and keep moving. Lieutenant Harris gathered the unit for final instructions. "Listen up," he said, voice low but commanding. "The enemy is entrenched, but we have artillery support on call. Smoke grenades will cover our advance. Move in pairs, cover each other, and keep communication tight. We take the village, and we hold it. No exceptions." The advance began. Soldiers sprinted across open ground, keeping low, moving from shell crater to crater. Mortar rounds exploded nearby, sending earth and debris into the air. Bullets whipped past, some tearing through the ground inches from their feet, others striking nearby comrades. The hedgerows had not been conquered yet. Each line of bushes was a gauntlet of hidden defenders, trained to kill from cover. Bobby and Riley moved in tandem, firing controlled bursts, throwing grenades to flush enemies from fortified positions. Each explosion was followed by a tense silence, broken only by the cries of the wounded and the crackle of small arms fire. Inside the village, chaos reigned. Streets were filled with overturned carts, broken timber, and smoke from burning buildings. German soldiers fought desperately, trying to slow the advance. Snipers in the upper windows picked off anyone exposed, and machine guns raked the streets with deadly precision. Lieutenant Harris coordinated with the men, signaling movements with hand gestures, guiding them from cover to cover. Bobby found himself in a house converted into a temporary command post. Windows shattered, doors splintered, the walls riddled with bullet holes. From inside, he fired at targets spotted in the street, each shot calculated, each moment critical. Then came the call. A squad of enemy soldiers had broken through the line on the left flank, threatening to encircle the unit. Harris barked orders to counter the maneuver. Bobby and Riley moved swiftly, using narrow alleys and side streets to flank the attackers. The clash was close quarters, rifles fired at point-blank range, grenades thrown into doorways, and bayonets used when ammunition ran out. Amid the fighting, Bobby caught sight of a young German soldier, no older than 17, firing wildly before being struck by a soldier from Bobby's squad. The horror of war, the human cost, was undeniable. Each victory came with a weight, each step forward stained with the blood of the living and the dead. By mid-afternoon, the village was mostly under Allied control. The remaining defenders were holed up in a few stubborn positions. Bobby and Riley, along with a handful of others, were ordered to clear a farmhouse that had been fortified as a machine gun nest. The building had been rigged with traps, and the air inside smelled of smoke, sweat, and fear. Lieutenant Harris signaled Bobby forward. With careful steps, he approached the door, grenade in hand. He counted silently to 3, threw it, and ducked for cover. The explosion rocked the building, sending debris flying. Bobby and his squad rushed inside, rifles ready. The defenders, disoriented and panicked, were quickly neutralized. By evening, the village was secured. The cost had been high, men lay wounded and dead, streets were littered with debris, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and gunpowder. Yet there was a sense of grim triumph. The objective was accomplished, and the Allies now held a critical crossroads, opening the path for further advances into occupied France. Bobby sat against a wall, exhausted, cleaning his rifle. He looked at the letter once more, reading Emily's words aloud to himself, a quiet moment of connection amid the chaos. "I'll come home," he whispered. "I'll survive this. I'll see you again." In the days that followed, the men consolidated positions, treated the wounded, and prepared for the next push. Reinforcements arrived, bringing fresh soldiers, supplies, and hope. The battle for Normandy was far from over, but the courage, strategy, and determination displayed by men like Bobby and his comrades had already changed the course of the campaign. Letters continued to arrive and depart, each one a lifeline between the front and the home front. The night before D-Day had seemed distant now, but its significance was clear. The decisions made, the bravery shown, and the sacrifices endured had shaped history. Every letter carried the weight of hope, love, and resilience. By the time Normandy was fully liberated, the Allies had secured critical objectives, pushed German forces back, and laid the foundation for the liberation of France. The stories of bravery, such as Bobby's, became part of the larger narrative, a testament to courage, strategy, and human endurance in the face of unimaginable adversity. Fade out with the image of Normandy at dawn, smoke rising from the fields, and soldiers marching forward, determined to see the fight through to victory.